The Matthews family was woken early by a knock that echoed through their quiet home. Sarah, the youngest, opened the front door to find a plain envelope lying on the doormat. As their mother, Lisa, approached with coffee in hand, Sarah handed her the envelope, confused. "It's from the HOA," she said, her brow furrowing. Curiosity quickly turned to dread as Lisa tore it open. The room grew silent. "They've taken Max," she finally said, her voice trembling. "They claim he was roaming." But Max had never left the yard. A sturdy fence surrounded their beloved companion, a German shepherd with a heart as big as his bark. "This can't be happening," she muttered, frustration boiling over. "Let me see that." James, Sarah's older brother, reached for the letter. His anger was palpable as he read aloud the HOA's formal language, which dripped with self-righteousness. "We have taken possession of your dog due to repeated violations of community regulations." The sound of those words hung in the air like a dark cloud. "What do we do now?" Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with worry. James slammed the letter down on the table. "We contact animal control. We have to get Max back." The urgency in his voice urged the family into action. They divided their tasks. Lisa would call the HOA, while James and Sarah would scour the neighborhood for any leads. Hours turned into a chaotic blur of phone calls and frantic searches, but every route led to a dead end. The HOA offered no answers, their smug authority shutting down every attempt to appeal. "Max is out there, and we'll find him," James vowed, driven by a sense of urgency that felt like a ticking clock. Days passed, and the desperation settled like a weight on their chests. Each search yielded nothing, and the absence of their loyal friend left a palpable void in the home. Then, a glimmer of hope appeared. James received a call from a reliable friend who had heard whispers about a dog matching Max's description seen far away, in a rundown area across the state. "Jake, we can't let this go," he declared, determination strong in his voice. Knowing well that they had to act, Jake packed his belongings without delay. He couldn't shake the image of Max's hopeful eyes from his mind. "Hold tight, buddy," he whispered to himself, as he set off on the treacherous journey, with each mile amplifying his resolve. As he drove into the unknown, uncertainty pricked at him. Who would hold Max captive? What would he find at the end of this road? Each question pushed Jake faster, his heart racing with the thought of saving his brother's dog. He swore to himself that he wouldn't return without Maximum. The closer he got, the more the urgency of his mission took hold. Little did he know, the fight for Max was just around the corner, a fight that would test their family's courage and unravel the very foundation of the HOA's authority. The whispers of the community were growing louder, and Jake could sense change in the air, but first, he had to find Max. As he neared the location detailed in the tip, anticipation mixed with dread. Deep into an area he'd never visited, surrounded by dense woods and rundown shacks, Jake slowed down. Something pulled at his gut. It was time to find out if Max was still waiting for him. Each moment felt like an eternity, and just then, he spotted it, a flicker of movement that sent shockwaves through his entire being. There it was, an old, weather-beaten shack hidden away, and by its side, his loyal companion, Max, chained and alone. "Max!" he shouted, rushing forward. But as Jake reached for the chain, voices rose behind him, the overwhelming presence of authority looming as the HOA arrived with a vengeance. "Max!" Jake shouted, rushing forward. But as he reached for the chain, voices rose behind him. The overwhelming presence of authority loomed as the HOA representatives, their faces twisted with indignation, emerged from the trees. They had been waiting, ready to reclaim what they believed was theirs. "Step away from that dog," barked one of the leaders, a stout man with a clipboard. "That animal is property of the HOA. We have the right to seize him for trespassing." "Seize him?" Jake's voice trembled with anger. "You have no right to take him from my brother. You can't just chain him up like this." He looked down at Max, whose eyes flickered with recognition. The gentle wag of his tail conflicted with his obviously weak condition. "Property. This is a living being," Jake exclaimed, moving closer. "Max is not just some possession you can claim and abandon. Return him to me." The representatives exchanged glances, their demeanor calculated and cold. "We were doing you a favor, Jake. Your brother was neglecting him. We had no choice but to intervene," the stout man insisted, his gaze hardening. "No choice." Jake's heart raced as the others closed in, encircling him. "You took him across state lines. You have no idea what you've done to my family." The frustration surged through him, a mix of indignation and fear for Max's safety. "Enough!" the stout man shouted, raising his hand like it was a gavel. "We will not stand here and allow you to impede our authority. Step back, or we will call the authorities." Jake hesitated, assessing the sea of faces. He could feel the weight of their combined authority, but Max needed him. Gathering every ounce of courage, he reached for Max's collar, unbuckling the rusted chain in one swift motion. The moment the chain fell away, Max leaped into Jake's arms, nuzzling against him as if trying to understand the whirlwind around them. The HOA men's composure shifted, fury surfacing like a tidal wave. "If you think you can just take him and walk away, you're sorely mistaken," one of them yelled, but Jake was already moving, getting Max to his feet and racing towards his truck parked just up the gravel path. "Jake, get in!" he yelled, opening the door. Max stumbled slightly, but the sound of his brother's voice spurred him forth. In a flurry of adrenaline, they jumped into the vehicle. The engine roared to life, and with a squeal of tires, they sped down the narrow road. "Did you see the way they were treating him?" Jake gasped, glancing at Max, who was panting heavily in the back seat. "I can't believe they thought they could actually keep him." The adrenaline faded, replaced by a wave of worry. Max looked frail, his fur matted and dirty. "We need to get you home, buddy." "I'm so sorry for what you've been through," Jake murmured, reaching back to scratch Max behind the ears, trying to comfort him in the chaos of emotions swinging within him. As they hit the main road, a realization struck Jake like a lightning bolt. This was just the beginning. They hadn't just stolen Max, they had violated his family's rights in the process. The fight wouldn't stop here. It couldn't. Once they arrived back home, Jake hurried Max inside, immediately assessing the situation. The place felt lifeless without the usual bounce of their beloved dog, and the tension still hung in the air. James, waiting anxiously, rushed in as the door swung open. "Did you get him?" he asked breathlessly, his eyes darting between Jake and Max. Jake nodded, barely able to contain his anger. "But it's not over. They're going to try to take him again. We have to stand up to them." James clenched his fists. "They can't just take our dog. We need proof of what they did, and we need to spread the word about this." As the gravity of their situation settled in, the brothers joined forces, brainstorming ideas about how to fight back against the HOA. They would need to gather evidence and rally support from their neighbors, folks who had been victimized before. But first, Max needed care, his health and spirits were far more important. Together, they loaded up the family van, deciding to make a visit to the veterinarian. It was a start, a step towards healing not just for Max, but for the entire family. As they drove, Jake's mind raced with thoughts of justice and what it would take to protect Max and their rights as pet owners. Deep within him lay a growing determination, a fire ignited by the injustices faced, now propelling them forward into a fight they could not ignore. As they pulled into the veterinary clinic parking lot, Jake's heart raced. Max lay panting in the back seat, his frame frail and tired. "I'll get him," Jake said, immediately jumping out of the van. He opened the back door and gently lifted Max into his arms, carrying him toward the entrance. The dog looked up at him with trust, and it filled Jake with a mix of determination and despair. Inside, the vet was quick to assess Max's condition. "He's dehydrated and malnourished," Dr. Chen stated, her brow furrowing as she examined the dog. "We'll need to run some tests and start him on fluids." While they waited, Jake and James filled Dr. Chen in on what had happened. Their anger was palpable as they recounted the events. "They treated him like a piece of property," Jake said, his voice rising. "We can't let them get away with this." Dr. Chen listened intently. "You're right to be concerned. This is a violation of many animal rights laws. You may want to document everything, photos, any evidence of how he was treated. It could become important in your fight against the HOA. As the vet took Max into the back for treatment, the brothers sat in a quiet corner of the clinic, the weight of the world pressing down on them. What if they come after us? James asked, anxiety etched on his face. We need a plan. We can't just sit back and wait for them to strike again. Let's gather support, Jake replied, his mind racing through the neighborhood. People need to know that they aren't the only ones targeted by the HOA. We can't be the only ones who've suffered under their rules. With renewed purpose, they left the clinic once Max was stabilized, planning to organize a neighborhood meeting. They spent the entire evening drafting flyers and posting them around their suburban community, each word more potent than the last. By sunset, a sense of camaraderie filled their hearts. People began reaching out, sharing their own stories of frustration and fear about the overreach of the HOA. The following day, a modest crowd gathered in their backyard, curiosity and concern flickering on their faces. James stood on a makeshift platform made from a repurposed ladder, the gathered friends and neighbors watching intently. We've all dealt with them, James began, his voice steady. The HOA thinks they can decide what we do with our lives, with our homes, and even our pets. We cannot let this continue. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. Jake took his turn, eyeing the faces of their friends and neighbors. We need to stand united. If we gather enough evidence and present it, we can hold the HOA accountable for their actions. It'll show them they can't threaten us anymore. The group erupted into discussions, ideas flowing like water. They would band together, share experiences, and document every misstep the HOA had taken. A sense of empowerment washed over them. It was as though they were finally taking control of their lives. As the meeting concluded, one neighbor, a woman named Carla, stepped forward, a mix of determination and fear in her eyes. I've been meaning to speak up. They tried to seize my cat last year, claiming I didn't have the proper paperwork. I was too scared to fight back. Encouraged by her bravery, others chimed in, revealing similar tales of intimidation. Each story only further fueled their collective resolve, solidifying the group into a coalition ready to take action. They took notes, planned follow-ups, and agreed to gather evidence over the coming weeks, fully embracing their newfound purpose. With each passing day, Jake and James felt the momentum building. They began to collect documentation, capturing incidents where the HOA had exerted its authority unfairly against other residents. But as they pressed forward, a dark storm cloud lingered. Max's health was still fragile. Just as they began to feel like they were making progress, a new twist awaited them. On one fateful afternoon, a knock echoed at the door, and when Jake opened it, his heart sank. Standing there were representatives from the HOA, armed with their demands and a threatening ultimatum. This time, they intended to take the fight to court. The battle against the HOA was about to escalate, and the stakes were higher than ever. What would they do now? The weight of the HOA representatives' presence pressed heavily upon Jake as they stood in the doorway, their smug smiles grating against the urgency of the moment. We're here to discuss your defiance, the stout man intoned, his voice dripping with condescension. It seems you believe you can rally the neighborhood against us, but we assure you, this will not end well for you. Jake's heart raced, but he forced himself to meet the man's gaze, a steady resolve replacing his initial shock. You've already crossed the line by taking maximum. You can't intimidate us into silence anymore. We've got stories, people willing to speak up, and we won't back down. The representative smirked, glancing at his cohorts as if Jake's words were nothing more than a joke. Oh, we've heard the rumors circulating the neighborhood. But make no mistake, we intend to take legal action against you all for slander and for encouraging this coalition, he said, emphasizing the word with disdain. Our attorneys will be in touch. With that, they turned to leave, but Jake wasn't finished. You think this is over? We will show you how serious we are. It's time the neighborhood stands together against your tactics. As the door closed behind them, Jake felt a rush of adrenaline. The threats from the HOA only solidified their cause. This was no longer just about Max. It was about standing up for all the families living under the shadow of the HOA's tyranny. Jake! James called from the kitchen, where he had been eavesdropping. What are we going to do?
"This is the EMT footage," Dennis said, his voice clear and steady, drawing eyes toward the screen. The video normalized. A shaky but clear picture emerged, showing Karen's truck blocking the gravel path. The ambulance lights flashed in the background, echoing the urgency of the moment. Murmurs filled the air as the realization dawned on the neighbors watching. "Do you see this?" Miller pressed on, his voice rising. "This is Karen literally blocking access to emergency services while my dad was dying." Karen's face turned ashen, her confident facade cracking. A few neighbors shifted in their seats, eyes flitting between her and the screen. "Isn't that what a bad neighbor would do?" he continued, relentless. "This isn't about property values. It's about humanity. She chose her rules over my father's life." The video progressed, capturing moments of chaos and desperation. The paramedics could be seen waving their arms, desperately trying to find another way, but failing. The crowd began to murmur louder, doubt creeping into the hearts of those who had supported Karen. "Just a little inconvenience," Karen scoffed, but her confidence was wavering. Miller glanced at the faces in the crowd. Horror, disbelief, and empathy were replacing the earlier doubt. "We've all faced her wrath in one way or the other. This is more than just us. This is about the entire community. We deserve to live peacefully without being bullied." As the video ended, he turned back to the crowd, his voice unwavering. "If she can block an ambulance to our home, what makes you think she wouldn't go further? What promises will be next on her list of violations?" From the back of the room, Mrs. Jenkins stood, trembling but resolute. "I got a fine for painting my fence a shade too vibrant." She pointed a shaking finger at Karen. "This woman threatened to ticket me for bringing cookies to the neighborhood bake-off because I didn't submit a form." Others joined her in quick succession. "She fined me for my garden. She claimed my kids weren't allowed to play outside." Miller felt the tide turning, people expressing the frustrations they had buried. "We need to fight back," he shouted over the swell of voices. "We can't let fear rule our lives or our community any longer." Karen glared, fury written all over her face, but the confidence she once held was crumbling fast. "You're all just being manipulated by these lies," she screamed, but her words fell flat against the rising tide of solidarity. A neighbor stepped forward, steely resolve in his expression. "No, Karen, we've seen the truth today, and we will not follow you into the dark anymore." As their murmurs grew louder, Miller felt adrenaline surging. He'd fought for his father and their land, but now it extended to everyone, not just for them, but for every person in that room who had suffered under the weight of Karen's greed and control. "Let's vote," Dennis said, voice booming over the chaos. "A vote for our neighborhood to take back control." The motion was proposed, a united front against the darkness of Karen's reign. As the room filled with shouts of agreement, Miller steadied himself. There was no going back now. This moment was the culmination of struggle and pain, and it brought with it the hope of a future unmarred by oppression. But still, the shadows of Karen's schemes loomed, waiting to lash out in the wake of their victory. And as the crowd raised their hands in solidarity, Miller saw the flicker of rage in Karen's eyes. This battle may have ended in their favor, but the war was far from over. The day would come when Karen would retaliate. He could feel the storm building on the horizon. As the votes were raised in favor of standing up to Karen, Miller felt a flicker of triumph. The momentum was theirs. Yet, as the celebration began to ripple through the crowd, he couldn't shake the feeling that their struggle was far from over. Karen's eyes simmered with a fury that threatened to boil over, promising consequences. "Congratulations, everyone," she sneered, her voice cutting through the cheers like a knife. "You've elected a mob mentality. Enjoy your little victory. It won't last long." Miller stepped forward, fueled by anger. "This is not a mob. This is solidarity. We won't let you ruin this community any longer." Karen laughed coldly, the sound sending a shiver down his spine. "You think you can just brush me aside that easily? I've spent years building alliances, and I will not go quietly. You'll see." With that, she turned sharply on her heel and stormed out of the cafe, leaving a heavy silence in her wake. Patrick placed a reassuring hand on Miller's shoulder. "We stand together, son. She can't tear us apart now. The room buzzed with excitement. The neighbors exchanged numbers, vowing to meet regularly to ensure they stayed united against any of Karen's future schemes. But even with the excitement bubbling, Miller's mind spun with questions. What would Karen do next? As discussions continued, Miller felt the need to take a different approach. We need to prepare. She's not one to back down easily. Dennis nodded, chiming in. We should document everything. If she tries anything, new rules, new fines, we gather evidence. We need to keep her in check. The night drew on, filled with laughter and conversations about the future. Yet, in the depths of Miller's heart, a nagging doubt lingered. He watched as the crowd dispersed, each neighbor walking away with hopeful smiles, a sense of unity newfound. Their strength had been demonstrated tonight. But as the sun dipped below the horizon and shadows stretched across Pioneer Hill Ranch, he realized that the fight was far from over. Just as he settled down to sleep, his phone buzzed beside him. It was a message from Dennis. Asterisk, I have a bad feeling about Karen. Let's meet tomorrow. She needs to be stopped before she strikes back. Asterisk. Miller's chest tightened. He knew the battle lines had been drawn, but the war would only escalate now. The next day dawned with ominous clouds hanging low in the sky, a fitting backdrop for the uncertainty Miller felt. As he and Dennis gathered at their usual spot behind the barn, the air felt charged with unspoken tension. I've been thinking, Dennis began, his brow furrowed. If she truly has allies, she might be planning something bigger, something we can't just counteract with community votes. We need a plan, a real strategy. Miller agreed, the gravity of their situation settling heavier on his shoulders. Let's form a committee, get a few trusted neighbors, Kathy, James, and Mrs. Jenkins. We can brainstorm ways to first gather intel on any movement she may make. As they pieced together a plan, the sun emerged from behind a cloud, illuminating Pioneer Hill Ranch in golden hues. They needed to take control of the narrative before Karen could spin it further. Later that week, the first unofficial committee meeting took place in the cozy living room of Mrs. Jenkins' home. A dozen neighbors milled about, sharing ideas fueled by shared resolve. I remember Karen mentioning tearing up the community garden, James said, anger sparking in his voice. We should rally around it, organize a community day to restore it. And what about those fines? Kathy chimed in, her expression fierce. If we all chip in to cover costs that she imposes, it shows her power is nothing but a hollow threat. Miller's heart swelled as ideas flowed freely. They exchanged stories of how Karen had disrupted lives, each one deepening their resolve to stand together. But the uplifting energy felt electric, underlined by a persistent dread that lingered. Karen wasn't a foe to be underestimated. She was intelligent, strategic, and now cornered. As the meeting wrapped up with laughter and plans to meet again, Miller took a moment to step outside for air. Staring up at the darkening sky, he tried to silence the anxiety that bubbled beneath the surface. The following days turned chaotic, Karen's retaliatory tactics ramping up. Hasty flyers appeared in mailboxes, twisting the narrative, making them out to be reckless troublemakers threatening the peace. Rumors spread, and suspicions simmered among neighbors. But the committee fought back with unity. They distributed their own flyers, highlighting the community spirit, the many successful projects they had undertaken together. They organized neighborhood gatherings, finding strength in numbers, leveraging their close bonds to counteract Karen's divisiveness. Weeks turned into months, a ceaseless push against each other. Miller discovered a newfound resilience in community. Yet, as autumn settled in, the stakes grew higher. One gray morning, he received an alarming call from Dennis. It's bad, Miller. Karen has put up legal notices against me and the others. She wants us out. The urgency swelled like a rising tide. Miller knew they had to act immediately. They convened an emergency meeting that evening, aware they were racing against time. Inside the warm, crowded room, tension hung thick, but unity was tangible. Miller stood up. We've hurt her standing, but now she's showing her true colors. This is our chance to turn the tide once and for all. We can't let her break us. Instead, we counterattack, together. The room erupted in agreement, laughter and applause transforming into focused resolve. The weeks of planning culminated in a grand rally at the center of Pioneer Hill, with signs that read community over control and unity is strength. The entire town turned out, speaking out against Karen, sharing stories of love and support, resilience and strength. As Miller stood in front, his heart swelled with pride watching neighbors standing shoulder to shoulder. This isn't just about us. It's about what we can build together. Our lives are worth fighting for. Let's show Karen that she doesn't scare us anymore. The crowd roared, a chorus of voices rising in unison. But among the cheers and excitement, Miller noticed a shadow lingering at the outskirts. The silhouette of Karen, arms crossed, betrayal etched on her features. A fire ignited within him. Miller knew this would reach its climax soon, but now they were armed with the truth of their community's spirit, and the tides were finally turning. The battle raged on, but this time they were fighting together. They wouldn't let fear win. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, the darkness was only beginning to lift, and Miller steeled himself for the next challenge, knowing that no matter what came next, they would face it as one.